Well, we are going to do some question and answers. Please think about some questions that you want to ask to any of them. But yeah, we have Todd that give a talk earlier. We will have Andrea closing, and Elaine that yesterday gave a great workshop. So for start, let's introduce a little bit about yourself so we all know you, and if you could say how many years or how did you know Elixir, so we can start with that.
So,
Oh,
I am Elaine. I speak Portuguese. Unfortunately, I am able to understand Spanish, but I'm not able to speak. But it's fine. I am a senior software engineer at the Rail, working with Ruby and Elixir for the past 3 years. I met Elixir in Plataforma Tech, the company behind the language, and I started there like in the first week before Elixir Brazil, the first edition, and I was able to meet Valim in person, and like my passion about the programming language started there. That's all.
hola, yo soy Andrea, yo hablo poco español, pero español de la España. Entonces yo no hablo aquí. Aquí I speak English. It's too different. No, just kidding. Exactly. Yeah, I'm Andrea. I'm in the Elixir core team, and I've worked with Elixir now for 8 years, I think, and I've been in the core team for 6 years. And I came into the language. You'll see the keynote. I can't spoil my. Otherwise, I'll run out of the time in the keynote. So.
I'm Todd. Yes. I used up all my Spanish earlier. Please, English only. And I started working with Elixir 7 years ago. And then professionally about 6 years ago professionally. Started playing with it about 7 years ago. I'm on the Hex core team, and I think that's it.
Cool, thank you. I'm Matthias, he's Mauri. We both work at YWorks. And yeah, we're gonna just ask you a couple of questions to start the discussion going. And if you wanna interrupt or you wanna say something in particular.
I interrupt you first. We'll call him, instead of Maury, we'll call him El Guapo.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Okay, so El Guapo.
Perfect. So, just a quick question. In your experience, how hard it is to introduce Elixir in a company that haven't used it before? For example, like a Ruby company or just any Java company? Yeah.
I go. Okay. It depends. I think the biggest issue with Elixir, it depends on the size of the company. In my opinion, a lot. If the company is small, I've found it pretty easy to introduce Elixir, and also depends on the background of the people, right? Like for example, a Ruby team is pretty easy to introduce to Elixir, which makes no sense to me. Like they are completely different, but like there's this, I guess stigma on Elixir that it's like it's for Ruby people. So it's pretty easy. If you for Java, I guess it would be quite different. And then it depends on the size of the company a lot, because bigger companies, they just don't want to take risks on anything. Like in my experience, you have a big company that has money, like they want to throw the money at people and like solve stuff with whatever. Like it's less important to like for a big company to have like a young language that's like nice to use and it has all these nice features, because they're gonna like they have the money. The problem is that to find the people usually, right? Like finding people is a big issue. Not something in the last like 3 weeks, because like everybody's getting laid off, but like this is how it used to be, at least. Now things are going to change maybe, but so in my experience, like it's not so hard if the company is small, and if they if using Elixir is a good investment, like if they want to attract talent, for example. That's a big deal because there's a lot of smart people that are doing Elixir and have done a lot of Elixir jobs. So, you put out a Elixir jobs, you're going to get some candidate, but you're not going to get hundreds of them. So if you need hundreds of people, that's really hard. And it's also useful it's also easier if you have, for example, if your company has some sort of like resource problems, like you're using like usual cases, you're using Rails and you have like these many servers and you want to like scale down to many fewer servers. That's pretty easy to introduce in big companies for now until there's a huge market of Elixir developers and some big companies using Elixir that kind of like Rust as Mozilla or go to Google, whatever. Like it's gonna be a little bit harder, but in small companies, in consultants, I think it's really easy because people developers seem to love to use Elixir. So the problem is never to convince the developers to use it. I think if that makes sense.
Personal experience is that for as a Ruby engineer myself, when somebody introduces Elixir, I think the first thing you should do is just say, do you know how you put everything into Sidekick because you want it to run concurrently? And they, okay, yeah, I do. Okay, this does that as a primitive. So you don't have to put everything into Sidekick. You can actually just run it inside the program. So I think that makes a big difference. And personally, I came to Elixir through Crystal. So Ruby to anybody know Crystal, Lang? Okay. Yeah, so for me, I saw Ruby, then Crystal, and thought, okay, well, I've got concurrency model, which is actually pretty similar to it's the same concurrency model Go uses, but it's pretty similar to the one that Erlang uses. And then the function overloading, being able to write functions with different signatures with the same name. And those were the two things that in Crystal, I thought, okay, this is amazing compared to Ruby. And then to find out that Elixir could do a lot of the same things. For me, that was easy. I don't suspect a lot of teams are in Crystal right now looking for a solution. Maybe.
Great, thanks. I have another one here that is, what are some cases that you have been seen Elixir being successful that surprise you the most? Because, yeah, never crossed your mind. This more thinking on Elixir in some applications in production that you say, oh, this is a great fit for this. I wasn't expecting an experience with that.
I have one quick one, and then I'll pass it. But where I work at Jackpocket, one of the things that we need to do is run applications on different Windows machines at our operations centers. So not by programmers, just by end users. And we were able to package everything up using Burrito. So shout out to Digit for Burrito. And actually make Windows executables out of Elixir programs. So we're able to write everything in Elixir, ship them an executable that they can just double click on a Windows machine to run. So I think that's maybe 3 or 4 years ago would have been hard to consider.
So I not been working with Elixir that long to know a lot of cases or like arguments about what we should use or not. I only joined a company that was using Elixir before, but I know a few cases like when we are looking for an alternative to handle a performance issue, we were able to use the tools we have in the Erlang platform, like the ETS and for instance, Gen server to handle performance or to handle to make the application more fault tolerant for one critical page we had, and it was something so quickly to do once you have the tools and you know the basics. We didn't have to add any special library or anything. Just using the built-in tools was super impressive for me.
Yeah, surprising uses, you said, yeah. Well, this a bunch of stuff that's coming out lately is all things that I would have never expected Elixir to fit in. The latest one is NX, right? Like numerical Elixir. like I spent 95% of my Elixir career saying, oh, Elixir is great. The only thing it can't do is like math fast, right? So like if you have a problem where you have to do math fast, like go use something else. Otherwise, I love it for everything. And now like they took that away from me, too. So. And another one was that was pretty interesting that I don't think it gained as much traction, but was Surface, I think it was called, the UI framework in Elixir. That's also like a case where I would never have imagined to use Elixir, because for me Elixir is a language to handle like build big distributed systems, whatever that means, right? Like, or be it like embedded devices or web servers, or web sockets or real-time systems or whatever. That's where I always put it. That's the box I always put it in. So these are definitely things that I did not expect, but they seem to be going really well. So
Cool, thank you. On that same topic, like after having LiveView around for a few years, what do you think about like LiveView versus the old-fashioned SPAs? Like React and all that. Having that comparison you just made, saying Surface is like React, right? Because you can like. Yeah. What do you think about that, like, that comparison? You all.
Personally, I like it a lot. So the last company I worked for, SimpleBet, we went all in on LiveView first, then LiveView components when those came out, and then Surface UI later on. And we didn't even have a JavaScript team at all there to build anything. So every application we worked on, the same people worked on the back end as on the front end, which is normally not a great idea. But I think in LiveView, what's nice is the life cycle is very familiar. If you've worked with Gen servers, it's very, very easy to understand the life cycle of a LiveView. And then in Surface UI, I think you mentioned, we really like that a lot, because the way that it, in Phoenix 017 has brought in a lot of this stuff from Surface, but the syntax looks a lot like JSX, the way you can build the templates out, and so I think that would be more familiar for people, although I haven't seen any JavaScript people switching into Elixir LiveView. It's mostly, we have Elixir people already, we don't have people to do the front end. Oh, you can do that? Okay, great. We don't have to hire a new person. So, and I've had projects running for years on LiveView, like since the very first release came out. I built a dashboard for my house that sits in my office, and it updates every second. And I mean, it's extremely reliable. So, yeah, I don't know. LiveView.
yeah, so I think it has a market fit. Like, there's a lot of people that want something like that. I am not a fan of the paradigm for many use cases. So I think, like, I'm a user of computers and phones that wants to use native stuff, because the web, I don't think the web is there yet. Like, I've never used a website on my phone that behaved remotely as good as an app, right? So, and I've used my phone in a lot of places without internet connection, and I still want to be able to do stuff. And the same goes for my computer, right? And now there's all this, like, LiveView seems to go in the opposite direction of that. It seems to go into like, okay, yeah, you need internet to do, like, to type text into a box or anything. The truth is that there's a lot of use cases where that's what you want, and that's totally fine, right? Like, for example, like the dashboard, or like internal tooling. Like, it gives you tools to build interactive apps easily, even as a person with not a lot of JS experience. And like, when you're building like internal apps, or like simple like a lot of the web and a lot of the stuff that we build is not Twitter. It's like smaller, a lot smaller. So that's totally fine. And you want internal admin tools in companies, that's totally fine to require internet, and there's not a lot of concurrent users. So those are fantastic use cases for that, I think. And being able, for example, this is my favorite thing, is like you can build a nice interactive internal tool with like one backend developer that doesn't really know too much about JavaScript. They just can go and build an internal tool. I don't want to move in that direction too much, because I think like it has its place, but also there's a lot of places where the model doesn't fit to me. To me, it's like going towards the wrong direction, which is like, because single page apps, they give you a proper software you can run on your computer without internet connection, and then they just use the internet connection to fetch the data, right? And that's the model that I really like generally for things like computer applications or phone applications, right? So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Nice. Thanks for the answer. Talking more about the community, say I'm looking towards contributing to Elixir, where would be most valuable to focus my efforts, and yeah, where help is needed, or if you have some guidance for me that I want to start contributing.
I can answer that. Like, I have the context from being in Brazil and not having access to a lot of translated documentation, a lot of translated material, like introductory material. One thing that we are having been discussing is like generating content to support newcomers. Like the documentation is great. It's fantastic to have access via the terminal, having a lot of examples, a lot of discussions about when you should use something or not. But if you are coming, you need to have a good background from other language to start. So there's this kind of gaps between if you are you are thinking of having Elixir as your first or second programming language, you can start generating this kind of material, generate these discussions. In Brazil, we usually discuss like what kind of material we can translate to Portuguese, because it's still a thing, like this is still a barrier. Portuguese, we're learning English in the schools, but it's not enough to have the contact. Like you have another step to dive into to thinking in that language, and then like in English, and then learning a new concept. Is for me one the key thing is start with no technical contributions. And my first contribution was like translating the Elixir school documentation. I was fixing just a typo, but it was a good start.
So the projects that I work on, mainly being nerves and hacks, I think we lack people with design skills to work on those projects. And so we've had some people come in and make really big contributions to fix the UIs and just make things look a little bit nicer, but they could be more frequent, I think, especially, well, really on both teams, but on the nerves team, the nerves team are like the super nerds of the Elixir world. And so like they try really hard to design a developer experience that's good, but I think there's probably some room for improvement there. I'm being very, very nice about that. Just for somebody to come in and as a newcomer to say, oh, this is easier to use, or I understand this, or this is better designed. On the Hex team, I mean, a lot of it is used through the CLI, and so developer experience makes some difference there. There's not as much graphical stuff on Hex, I think. So if you're a design-oriented person, I think we have a lot of really smart computer science people that are making the developer experience good in that way. So design help is, I mean, literally, if you can make something look a little better, Jose and everybody else will just praise you, because most of us have no design talent whatsoever. Any ideas? No. He agrees with me 100%.
I agree more with her.
Oh.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Do you guys want to ask any questions to them? Like, maybe this is a good time for that. ¿Una preguntita?
In español. Oh, no. We translate.
Thank you. I will try to ask this question in Spanish because I'd like to make my Spanish teacher very happy. Buenas tardes a todos. Me gusta mucho hablar sobre comunidades, sobre personas que están empezando en la programación, empezando con Elixir. Me gustaría de preguntar para las personas que hablan español, eh, si pueden recomendar algún material, algún site para aprender Elixir en español, porque como Elaine disse, não temos muita documentação escrita em outras línguas que não sejam em inglês. Em português só consigo lembrar de Elixir School. Me gostaria muito de saber de outras linguagens. Para mim que estou aprendendo espanhol, poderia ser muito bueno juntar aprender espanhol com continuar aprendendo Elixir. Muchas gracias.
You're welcome.
Es-
Okay. How much did I get of that? Okay, so looking for translations into Spanish for Elixir tools.
Nice.
Okay. Is that what else? Okay. He said a lot of things. What else did he say? What did I miss? Okay. Well, don't ask me. I don't speak Spanish.
La verdad, ni idea. Pero es una muy buena idea, creo.
El browser, a veces el translate del browser no anda muy bien, pero a veces sirve.
I don't speak Spanish, but I know like there's two or three books dedicated to introduction to it's not to introduction para alquimistas, something like that. I met that material in one of the ElixirConf, and there was like introduction to Elixir and another one for OTP, and I think a recent one for Phoenix. But this is I work with Ojane, so we are talking about most of this. We are in the same page for this kind of topic. But Elixir School is the thing that I have in mind, and I know we could translate some challenges like from exorcism, and what else? Having in the documentation, like just using the Google Translator is something that is easy to do, but it is different when we are reading a book dedicated to teach you about something than just describing how it works. I think that like thinking about how the community can grow and how we can make it, how we can have more people starting learning Elixir. This is the kind of content that is missing, like having new content teaching you how to learn a new skill. We have a lot of great books, many in English. Maybe we could start translating. I don't know who we should talk about it.
It's a great question. I don't even know if we have like resources available for other programming languages in Spanish. I don't know. Maybe JavaScript. But yeah, since this is like more of a niche, it's a little bit difficult. But yeah, great things. I'm gonna repeat that for the stream. There's like a Spanish YouTuber that has some Maquigas. It's his name. So cool. Thank you. So yeah, that was it for the community. If you want, I can ask one more question or yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Hello, guys. On an earlier talk, we saw how to simplify the code that uses the if, the con, the case with the function definitions. I was wondering, when would you use those other syntaxes? Like, when would you use a con? When would you use an if, a case, or do you just put everything in functions normally? Just a personal opinion. Thank you.
I think I can start with that. Like, if it's a little about personal styles, depend on the number of conditionals and how you want to evolve your code. But if you are in this moment, like moving from oriented object programming and going to functional, the if or con would be something easy to implement. I use a lot using the case when when I want to make it clear, like it has like the success phase and the error, when the function is small. Pattern matching is something that I like to use, like, oh, this is an opportunity to use here and extracting the function, but maybe it's not maybe my personal strategy is like if it's easier to see using a case or a con, use that to readability. I love pattern matching, but I don't think it's easier to understand when you have a lot of functions clause and when you're just adding a lot of functions, a lot of matchings there. Sometimes it's just a sign that maybe you need to extract that logic to another context, another way of, like, you need to refactoring. But I daily use it both, mainly cases and pattern matching, but depends on the problem.
It depends on the case. Yeah, thinking about it this whole time. No, but so for me, pattern matching is limited to some checks. You can't you can check everything with pattern matching. You can't check, for example, the number of I don't know. You can check the number of something, but you can't count the number of elements in a list that have a particular property. That's not a pattern expressible in a pattern match, right? You have to do. It has to be an expression that you evaluate at outside of a guard, right? So in those cases, your like case and function clauses already go away. So you're already left with if and con, right? And then for me, it's very easy because if you have one condition, con is if you have more than one condition. So con is kind of a if else if, and if is if. For pattern matching function clauses versus case, I think it's like really like it depends on style and depends where it makes sense. In some cases it makes sense to use one, and in some cases it makes sense to use the other. I like to use case particularly when you want to keep the expression that you're evaluating and its result locally. So something I really don't like to do, for example, is to call a function and then call a function and then pass the result to a function when the result is something like okay or error, because then when like the second function I lose the context completely of like what was the function that I was that generated the result, right? So case is a good. Another very good instance where case makes a lot of sense to me is when you have you have a function with multiple arguments and you want to pattern match on one of those arguments, right? In those cases, writing all the clauses with keeping the arguments that you don't want to pattern match on the same can be like repetitive, or it can lead to bugs even, because for example you have the first argument that you want to pattern match on a series of atoms, and the second argument must be a list, right? And then you would have to either write when is list on every single clause, right? So in that case, what I do is like I don't pattern match on the atom. I just say when is list, and then inside the function I do case, on the atom, and you list the atom. So that's where I would use case. For example, those are the instances where we would use case. Anything more? I said everything there is to say. So
I'll say one thing. Well, I mean, he's the expert, but when I started working on Hex, I remember learning Elixir style back in 17 or 18. Don't use the if. Like, nobody ever used if. So I kind of looked through the Hex code, didn't see if else anywhere. Asked Eric, asked Jose, like, does this PR make sense if I add an if else? And they were like, yeah, that is the most readable version of it. I think initially when people sort of went style crazy and were like, no, everything just becomes a function. But I think we've come back around to make it as readable as possible. I still don't see cond almost anywhere, and I personally don't use it very frequently at all. But if else for a single, like a Boolean type of condition, totally makes sense. Otherwise, case. And one thing I remind new Elixirists of when they get real particular about what data or what flow control they use is it all compiles into a case statement in the AST. So if you do if or function heads or whatever, and then at some point in the AST, it basically all looks just like a case statement, or at least as far as I know it does. Yeah, so it all boils down to a case statement at the end of the day. So you can't say it's a performance, difference from one to the other.
That's so cool. Thank you.
Can I make a comment? Before we go into any more questions, I think I knew what your question was going to be, so I'm going to answer it for you. So sort of. So I can, okay, you can,
I'm scared.
no, I promise this is good. No. So I wanted to say this. So I think as a Latin American group, a lot of the people that I've met work for companies that are based in the U.S. or in North America, right? So like, how many people work for a company or do work for a company that's in the U.S.? Yeah, so a lot of us, right? One thing I just wanted to make very, very clear. So as the company that I work for now uses Latin American programmers to help us out. The company I worked for before used Latin American programmers to help us out in Brazil and Uruguay. Ecuador, Costa Rica, all over Latin America. The time zones line up perfectly. And so if there's any American CTO that's still wondering, man, like I can't hire an Elixir programmer or it seems so hard to find them, it's just because you're only looking in the US. Like you need to expand your search a little bit, look in Canada, look throughout Latin America, and you're going to find some really great programmers. Some of the best people that I've worked with have been people that are in Latin America. And there really are very few good reasons that you could say, no, I don't want to hire somebody that's based in another country or on another continent. So, and I know, Elaine, you work for an American company. So.
Yeah, but I don't know if I read his mind. I can comment about hiring, but I don't know if it was your...
What has your experience been like? The real uses a lot of people.
Yeah, like it starts like, I think with the Plataforma Tech and YWorks maybe? And they like looking for Elixir, search for Elixir engineers here is strategic. Like I know we have a great foundation about programming. The only issue sometimes is like in the hiring process, they may be expecting more algorithm challenges, this kind of stuff, and it may require some preparation as any hiring process, but this is I think like looking for not only in the USA, and for us that live in the South America is good, like having all the advantages of receiving in dollars. Yeah, there's a lot of cool things, and the only difficult for me was English. I knew how to programming, I knew how to design code, but English was a thing. But this is like practicing, same for learning a new skill, like learning programming. You need to practice and fail and saying things that might sound like as expected, like introducing bugs in the language in some level. But it's getting better as the time passes. But I'm curious about your your question.
I wanted to go back to what you mentioned, Andrea, about NX and the interesting part of having a project in Elixir. What are your thoughts about it and about the data science part of it and how Elixir matches into that?
I have used NX only for going through a machine learning book. I use NX to do the examples, so my experience is zero with it. But and my experience is zero in general with like machine learning in general, and like computation heavy problems in general. I don't have a lot of experience, but the thing that next made me realize, even more than anything else we had before, like nerves and stuff that kind of expands Elixir outside of the domains where it's obvious to use it in, is that people like Elixir a lot. Like they are going to go out of their way to bend the Elixir to fit the problem that it doesn't necessarily have to fit, you know. They would go out of their way to do that just because it's like, it's a really nice language to use. I really like to use it, and it seems like a lot of people really like to use it, so much so as they want to use it for like embedded devices, and then they want to use it for now numerical stuff, right? So that's what I get from this, that it's like it's incredible that it's being used for this stuff. And the nice thing is that it seems like people that are interested in Elixir, they have a sort of similar, like an aligned mindset, where they build stuff in a very nice way, you know. So like even like you can see this over and over, like the way that Nerves is built. It's very, you know, focused on like there's a good developer experience and like you know, good documentation and so on. And the same goes for, you know, Surface, or can go for NX. Like, you know, there's a lot of good documentation. It seems like the people that build stuff with Elixir they should sort of share some mindsets, right? So I'm interested to see how it's gonna go. I'm interested to see if it's gonna, you know, make it into the machine learning world, which is very dominated right now, right? So it would be interesting to see. I mean, yeah, those are my thoughts, I think.
Seguimos, tenemos tiempo.
Quick question. What's your favorite OTP behavior and why?
Gen state M, because it lets you do you know, anything that the Gen server can do, but cooler, and it's it always, like, I always like to write state machines, and I never think about them, and when I do, I'm very happy with myself that I did, and so I like to use that, and it's really very flexible. You can do a lot of stuff with it, and a lot of problems turn out to be state machines. So I think that's my favorite one.
Oh, I don't have a favorite.
Okay.
I like them all.
Okay. Even Jan Event. Come on.
Last one.
Hi to everyone. Maybe it's a question to some of you, I don't know. Doing my research work along with Marcos, I stumbled upon the macro system, which is this powerful engine that allows you to inject code before building the AST, which Elixir compiles into the Vim. I also saw that in parts of the Phoenix framework, it's being used to actually generate the code that powers this framework, but I don't know if it has been your experience, Elixir programmers, if you had seen any advantage of the macro system in your day-to-day work.
This is easy. No. Like I don't remember to see any macros in the way of like, oh, this solved a huge problem we have, because in my context I work more in the web, like traditional problems. I mentioned like the problems that I was interested, like using the Gen server to handle the data from external servers and all the other stuff, but I don't remember to see any like advanced Elixir or things like that, mainly because we are with a lot of engineers like switching between language. Like sometimes I'm working with Ruby, sometimes I'm working with Elixir, and I try to stick to the basics, like having the basic tools, the basic using the basic things to maintain the system, focus on readability and maintainability. But like I like to have the power, but I don't use that much.
Yeah, I don't use macros a whole lot. I think what you mentioned sort of something that I think is important, which is the steps in the compilation process and how macros are kind of fit in their own place. And so if there's a change that needs to be made at a specific time during the compilation, so after one thing but before the others, a macro could be a good solution to that. I probably find myself using module attributes in those cases more than I would use macros, but I could see where there would be a point for using macros. In general, metaprogramming, I've always been advised, and I believe that it can be very confusing. So it can be clever, but you're going to confuse your coworkers, and you're going to confuse future you as to how it works. Um, and so I'm not that smart to begin with, and future me is less smart. So I try not to program myself into a corner. I think, yeah, I've definitely worked with people before that think, oh, I'm going to impress everybody by putting this into a PR and writing it into a macro. And usually in that process, everybody is like, can you please take that out of the macro? So yeah, I think I don't remember all the exact steps to the compilation process as to when things get compiled, but I know macros get compiled before functions do, and module attributes are somewhere before that or after that. I don't remember. So if there's something that you need that needs to happen before the functions are compiled, I guess a macro would be a solution. Although, like I said, I usually use module attributes instead.
Yeah, so the best advice is probably to avoid using them as much as possible. But they do have a lot of. I have almost never used them in application code, in business logic or in like work code, if that makes sense. But they are like very useful in libraries mostly, and you can tell that by the biggest, I think the biggest users of macros we have in the ecosystem are Elixir itself, Phoenix, and Acto probably. So they make very heavy use of macros, and it makes a lot of sense to put macros to optimize code or like have like nice DSLs on top of things that like thousands of people use, like Phoenix or Acto or Elixir, right? If you're gonna do a work application where like I don't know why you would put a macro to generate some code unless it's like very performance. So we do use it. It's like it can make sense to use it to generate code. This is my biggest use for it, like to generate code to make things faster. So for example, to generate like one example we have is I believe the MIME library, MIME library does this by like generating function clauses that compile time to match on all the MIME types that you can pass, which like Erlang and the Beam do it like a more efficient version of just checking one after the other, for example. We do the same in getText with locales and like translation strings. It's all macro-based to generate code that does that. And they're indispensable for when you want to do stuff like compile time. So for example, getText uses this you write the getText macro and it extracts the translation to a file at compilation time without any overhead or runtime, right? These are things that like other languages solve in terrible ways, like, C solves it with like basically like looking at the C file and finding getText parens calls. Like it's like a lot of it is terrible, and like being able to have these tools is amazing, but I've only used them seriously in Elixir, or Elixir makes a lot of use of it. Like if what Todd was saying, like if and con, they're all macros. Like a logger has a lot of macros in it. Like there's just a lot of the kernel module is just like chock full of macros, but in application code is probably not a good idea. Yeah, it's just confusing and hard.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was awesome. I had some fun. Cool. See you later.